for clicking and welcome back to a grammar lesson. I am Niharika, and in today's lesson we are going to look at the difference between have to, supposed to, and ought to. We're going to understand how to use these words in your sentences in English. And also, before we go ahead and look at the explanation, well, make a note that these words are modals and are always followed by verbs. Okay, so make sure you make a note of this, and now let's understand the difference. The first thing that we're going to look at is have to. Now, when do we use have to in English and what exactly it means? Now, have to can be used the way we use the word must. And it is used in a situation where you have no choice. Yeah, there are times when we have or when we can choose what we want to do. But when we end up using have to, or we end up using the word must in our sentences, it means that it is used for a situation where we have no choice and we have to do that thing. Yes. So, it's used for a situation when you have no choice. Now, to understand this better, let's have a look at some examples on the board. The first one is, I have to learn English. So here, probably you're using this have to, or you can also say I must learn English, is because you don't have a choice. Maybe you have moved to an English-speaking country and you're not able to live there without speaking English. So you have no choice. If you want to live a comfortable life in an English-speaking country, it's important for you to learn English. Okay, so that's exactly why you will say that I have to learn English, because you have no choice. Let's have a look at another example using the word have to. I have to submit the reports tomorrow. Okay, now you need to understand that again, we can either use have to or must, like I must submit the reports tomorrow, or else there will be consequences. So you have no choice, okay? It's like the deadline, you have to do it, okay? Or else your boss is really going to be mad at you. So you are saying that I have to submit the reports tomorrow. And then the last example for you is, I have to pay my taxes. Oh yes, you can't skip paying off your taxes. It is important for you to pay your taxes and you have no choice. Yes, if you again want to live a comfortable life in a country, it's important for you to pay your taxes. You cannot back off. So you have no choice and you have to pay your taxes, or you must pay your taxes. So that's how you will use have to or must in English. Okay, now let's move on and understand when do we use supposed to. Now, supposed to is used in English in a situation where there's an obligation. Or it's more like a rule that you need to follow. Now, let's look at some examples here. I am supposed to learn English. Now here probably you have taken up a job and it is, you have a choice, but then it's more like an obligation where your boss has said that, you know what, if you want to do good in your career, it's important for you to learn English. So it's more like an obligation to you, and that's why you use the word supposed to. So I'm supposed to learn English. So it's more like an obligation. Let's understand this better by looking at another example, which is we are supposed to submit the reports by tomorrow. So again, it's more like an obligation. Probably your clients are waiting for you, and there will be consequences, but it's not going to be very bad. But yes, it's more like an obligation. It's more that you have to do this. So we are supposed to submit the reports by tomorrow. Okay, and then the last example that I have for you using the word supposed to is you are not supposed to talk loudly in a hospital. Of course, if you start speaking loudly, patients are going to be disturbed. It's not a place where you can giggle, or it's not a place where you can talk loudly or on top of your lungs. You are supposed to maintain silence. So it's more like a rule that you need to follow, or an obligation that you need to follow, and that's why you use the word supposed to when you're talking about this. So you are not supposed to talk loudly in a hospital. Alright, so you got the difference between have to and supposed to. Have to can be used just the way we use the word must, where you have no choice, whereas supposed to is used more like an obligation or like a rule that you need to follow. And now let's understand how do we use the word ought to in English. Now let's understand how do we use ought to in English. Now, ought to is used in a situation where it's not an obligation, where you have a choice. So it is not as strong as the word must. Like we learned, when you use the word must or have to, then you don't have a choice. When you use supposed to, then it's more like an obligation. But when you end up using ought to, it is not as strong as have to or supposed to. So here it's more like an advice or a suggestion that you make. Now you also need to make a note that when you end up using ought to, you actually do not use it in questions or in negative sentences. So no using ought to for questions or for negative sentences. Okay, so it's just a thing that you need to make a note of so that you can speak or use these words confidently in English. Now, to understand this better, we are going to look at some examples. The first one is, I ought to learn English. Now remember, we learned I have to learn English because probably you are in an English-speaking country and you have no choice. The second one was like, I'm supposed to learn English, because it's more like an obligation, your boss has asked you to. But when you say that I ought to learn English, then probably you have a choice. Probably you just want to learn a new language, you have this fantasy of learning English. So you're saying, I ought to learn English. So it's not an obligation, it's not a must thing to do. But yes, it's like my choice, whether I want to do it or not. And that's why you're using ought to. Okay, let's look at another example, which is I ought to help my mom with the chores. Okay, now if I help my mom with the chores, she'll be really happy, but there won't be like major consequences if I don't help her with the chores, right? Like she's not going to be very mad at me, or she's not going to throw me out of the house because I did not help her with the chores. So it's like I am doing this willingly, and it's my choice whether I want to help her or not. And that's why I am using the word ought to. Okay? And then the third example that I have for you is I ought to revise for my exams, but I am too tired to do that. Now, probably tomorrow I have my exam and I need to revise, but I'm kind of prepared for the exam. And I'm too tired right now to go through it or revise the lessons. So it's my choice. It's okay if I don't even revise it. It's okay if I just wake up tomorrow morning and do it. because I'm too tired right now and it's not like a must thing, and that's why I use the expression ought to. Okay? So this is the way you will use the expression or the word ought to in English. So just understand that the difference is really very simple. Have to is a must thing to do. You have no choice. Supposed to is more like an obligation, whereas ought to is more like a suggestion or an advice, and you have your choice whether you want to do it or not. Okay? So let me know how much do you score in a test, and I'll be back with a new lesson soon. Till then, you take care.